machines all around us. And let's add custom block entities to Minecraft. Alright, we found us back Intelligence more, and in this tutorial we're going to be adding a custom block entity to our mod over here in Fabric 120.2, and this will include a custom block entity for this tutorial that's going to craft things in a way that is hard-coded, and then in the next tutorial we're going to do a custom recipe as well, and this will also include a custom block and all of that craziness. So let's begin. So what's quite important, as you can clearly see by the length of this video, is that there's a lot to do. And the real issue is that there is really no way to split this up into any logical sense, because we're going to have to go around every class that we're going to create like 2 or 3 times. And that's just how it's going to be. All of the code, as always, is available to you in the description below in the GitHub repository. All of the things that we're going to use, like the textures and all of that, also available to you in the description below. So let's get started by first of all adding the block. So this is going to be a custom block over here. And this is going to be the gem polishing station block. There we go. And this will, very importantly, extends the block with entity as well as implements the block entity provider over here. We're going to hover over this and implement the create block entity method. I'm going to hover over this again, create constructor matching super, making sure that we make this public right here. And that is the first step. The next step is we need a voxel shape. So a voxel shape, I'm going to show you the custom block that we're going to use, and it's going to be this one right here. I've used a similar type of thing before, and the idea is that, well, basically this is a little place where our item would go, and then we can, you know, polish it basically. And this is of course not quite a real block, right? A real block in the real size would be 16 by 16 by 16, and that would be this, whereas the height of this block is only about, let's say, 12. So we would want to change that, and we can change that with a custom voxel shape. So the voxel shape is basically when you hover over the block with your crosshair, like what is going to be the outside and displayed there, and that is going to be a private static final voxel shape. I'm going to call this the shape, and this is going to be equal to block.create cuboid shape 000, and we've seen that the x value is 16, right? That's fine, but then the y, so how far up we're going to go, is only 12, and then this is going to be 16 again, and we can return this by overriding the get outline shape method. That is totally fine, and then here we're returning the shape, and there you go. Then also extremely important, we want to override the get render type method, and we want to return the block render type of a model. If you do not do this, then your block is going to be invisible. So keep in mind to do this. Otherwise, as I said, your block is going to be invisible. There's a couple more methods that we need to override. However, for this, we both need the block entity as well as all of the rest of the stuff. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make a deliberate error right here so that we don't forget this. Let's then register the block, and let's continue from there. For this, I'm just going to copy over the Ruby door over here. That's going to be fine. This is the gem polishing station. And then, of course, in the name here as well, gem underscore polishing underscore station. That's going to copy the iron block. That's fine. We do actually want to keep the non-opaque right here, but no block set type over here. That's going to be fine because this is not a door block. This is, of course, the gem polishing station block. Let's immediately add this to the item group just so that I don't forget this, because that would be a bit of a folly right here. There we go. All right, for this, we also need a custom model JSON file, because this one cannot be, well, generated via DataGen, because of course, this is a completely custom model, right? So this would be a custom block model. Therefore, I already have this prepared. This is also going to be available to you. This is, of course, called the gem underscore polishing underscore station. And then the same thing with the texture over here. That's going to go under textures block, and there we go. And then lastly, while we're already down here in the textures, we can create a new directory called GUI or GUI, because that's where the GUI will go. So we can actually take a look at that as well. This is, of course, going to be the screen that you will see when you right-click the block, and then here you put an item in, and then here, basically, the result comes out. Quickly added the translation as well, and we can now proceed. So we have a block, and now we just need to, well, connect it to a block entity. Now, the block entity in and of itself is a way of saving additional data to a block. It's also used to create ticking abilities inside of a block, and basically is used for almost all of the different blocks that open a screen and things like that. So that is pretty much all done via block entities. So in the block package, we're going to make a new entity package, and inside that we'll need 2 new classes. The first one is going to be the mod block entities class, and the second one is going to be the gem polishing station block entity quite a long name here for this class, but that's going to be okay. And inside of here, this will extend the block entity class, and it will also implement the extended screen handler factory, as well as the implemented inventory, which you can see does not exist yet. The reason why this does not exist is because this is a custom class that I'm going to copy over. This is basically going to be the same all the way. The author here was Jews, but it is in the public domain. So there you go. I highly recommend you basically get this. This is once again available for download in the GitHub repository. So you can basically just copy this over. And this is just going to allow us a little bit of an easier time. As you can see, basically reading and writing it to the tags and all of that. It's going to make it easier for implementing the items and stuff like that. So we can hover over this and implement the methods. There's going to be a couple of methods that we have to implement. And we can also create constructor matching super. And with that, the block entity has been created and we're starting out here. So our block entity is going to have an inventory. If we once again look into the GUI, we have two different, well, basically slots that we can have an inventory in. So we're going to have a private final defaulted list of type item stack. So this is going to be our inventory. This is going to be our inventory equal to a defaulted list that of size 2 with a item stack.empty as its normal result. And you can see get items. We can now simply return the inventory and there we freaking go. To make this a little bit easier on us, we can also make two constants. That's going to be a private static final integer. And this is integer called inputs underscore slot equal to 0, and then duplicate this, and this is then the output slot, and that's equal to 1, because if we look into the inventory, right, this is a list, so this would be the input slot with index 0, and this would be the output slot with index 1. I highly recommend you do this, however, how many slots you have, because that's just going to make this much easier. In the right screen opening data, we want to say buff.writeBlockPass, and then just this.pass. This basically allows us to send the position of this particular block entity in the world from server to client and from client to server. It's just needed here in this case. Highly recommend to just do it like that. Then when it comes to the display name, I'm going to say a text.literal. I highly recommend if you properly make a custom block entity, just make a translatable over here. That is much easier. In this case, I'm just going to make this a polishing station. But like I said, highly recommended to just make a translatable and then translate it via the en_us JSON file. That just makes it a little bit more robust. For the create menu, we actually are going to make a deliberate error once again, simply because of the fact that I don't have a screen handler just yet. So we need to wait until we can actually make that. That's what I meant by saying, you know, we're going to have to run around the classes a couple of times before we can basically finish everything. There's going to be a couple of other things, and those are going to be a property delegate. So highly recommended is when you have the block entity right here, click on it and press Ctrl H to see all of the different block entities from vanilla. Those are going to be so invaluable to you. It is actually crazy. So for example, you might be like, well, how does a furnace work, right? You can look at the abstract furnace block entity and you can basically see everything that you have here. There's a property delegate. This is what we're going to basically take a look at in just a moment. You even have a create fuel time, and then also interesting things are the read and write NBT method. There's a tick method, which we're going to talk about in a moment as well. So there's a lot of stuff over here that I can just highly recommend to take a look at. So when we make a protected final property delegate, I'm going to call this the property delegate, and we'll also have a private int called progress as well, which is going to be 0, as well as a private int called max progress, which is going to be 72. This is going to be the way of keeping progress for our crafting, right? Because obviously when we put a certain item in here, what we want to do is we want this to start crafting, and then once the progress is done, then we want to have the output item appear right here, and then have the crafting process start all over again. And this is done with the progress and the max progress integers right here, and we're using the property delegate in order to synchronize this from the client and the server to the server and the client. Basically, this happens in the constructor right here. So we want to get rid of the type right here, making a deliberate error once again. That's fine. And then we want to say this.property delegate is equal to a new property delegate, which is going to create an anonymous class. I'm going to end this here with a semicolon. The get right here is going to be the following. We're going to return a switch right here of the index. And this is going to be case 0 is going to return gem polishing station block entity.this.progress. And a 1 is going to return the max progress, while the default case is just going to be a 0. We once again want to end with a semicolon right here. Then for the set, actually a similar thing goes, where we will switch with the index right here, and we'll say case 0 is going to set the gem polishing station block entity.this.progress equal to the value, and for a 1 we're going to set the max progress here to the value. And in size, you want to return a 2 because in this case, we have two different integers in this case that we're going to synchronize. So this always has to be the size of how many integers we're going to synchronize. And now that we have the progress and the inventory, what we want to do is we want to make sure that those are written and read in the NBT. So we want to override the write NBT as well as the read NBT methods. Extremely important here. And we want to say in the write, we want to say inventories dot write NBT, passing in the NBT right here, as well as the inventory. This is going to write the inventory when the world is, for example, saved, right? All of the things, like all of the different item stacks inside of our inventory are then going to be saved in this NBT, and then, of course, later saved in the world file. And we can also say nbt.putInt, and we're going to put in the gem_polishing_station .progress. Now you can call this whatever you want. Just make sure that this is unique and you basically know what it is. And then we are going to save the progress under this name right here. And then in the read NBT method, we're going to do basically the reverse. So we're going to say inventories.read NBT this time, passing in NBT and the inventory. So now it's going to read out the NBT that we saved via the write NBT method, and it's going to write that into the inventory over here. So this one is saving and this one is loading the data. And then here it's going to be a similar thing. So progress is now going to be equal to nbt.getInt, and the int that we're getting is the gem_polishing_station.progress. Make sure that this right here, of course, is written the same way as this. Otherwise, you're of course going to have some issues. Right, and for the time being, this is everything that we can do right here. Let's then go to the mod block entities to register the block entity once again. This is going to register it kind of like this. So there's going to be a public static final block entity type of type gem polishing station block entity. I'm going to call this the gem polishing station block entity. This is equal to registry, making sure we choose net Minecraft registry. Very important. .register registries block entity type, then a new identifier, of course, of tutorial mod.mod ID. I'm going to call this the gem_polishing_be. That's going to be fine for the name. After the first closing parenthesis, we then want to call the fabric block entity type builder that create gem polishing station block entity : new. After the new, comma, mod blocks dot gem polishing station, after the first closing parentheses build, and there we go. That is going to get us our block entity. And to just have this whole, we're going to make a public static void register block entities method right here, which is just going to call tutorial mod.logger and then an info over here registering block entities for tutorial mod.mod ID. This is once again not required, but it's just nice to have something in the register method, which we're immediately going to call right here, mod block entities dot register block entities, and there we freaking go. With this done, we can now go back to the block entity, and here in the type, we can then say mod block entities dot gem polishing station block entity. That's going to fix this error. The screen handler is not quite done yet because we haven't done anything with the screen just yet, but we'll do that in just a moment. And then here for the gem polishing station, we can actually also say we're going to create a new gem polishing station block entity, passing in the position as well as the state right here. And then we can actually continue with the rest of the block as well. Because the block is not quite done just yet, we actually want to override a couple more methods. The first one is the onStateReplace method. We then also want to override the onUse method, and we also want to override the getTicker method right here. And there we go. So those are going to be the three methods that we need. For the onStateReplace method, I'm just going to copy over the contents because they are pretty much going to be the same every time. And those are basically, if you can take a look at it, if this block is destroyed somehow or the state is replaced, then we're just going to scatter and spawn all of the items inside of the inventory. So basically the inventory right here, right, all of the items inside of there are going to drop when the block is destroyed. That's all that this is doing. And a similar thing is happening when we take a look at the onUse method. Is a similar process. Basically, if we take a look at this, we're just going to say, hey, if we are on the server, then I want to say, I want to get the block entity at this position. If this is a gem polishing station entity, then we're going to open this and then everything should be good to go. And this basically is going to open the screen handler right here that is like inside of the create menu method. Of course, that's not quite done yet, so we'll take a look at that. And then for the getTicker, a similar thing goes where we'll call the validateTicker method, passing in the type, passing in mod block entities dot gem polishing station block entity, and then we can start typing in world right here, and you can see it basically suggests this crazy contraption over here. I'm going to say block entity dot tick, and then passing in the world 1, passing in pause, and passing in state 1 as well. We end it with a semicolon. We can now hover over this tick method, create the tick method, and it's going to create the tick method in the gem polishing station block entity. We're just going to change the names right here to world and pause. And this is where all of our logic goes. So I suggest we just finish the logic right here. The first step is usually you want to make sure that when this is called on the client, you just return, because you basically always want to not call this on the client, and then the rest of the logic continues. So now here, when we're in the tick method, this one gets called once every tick or once every 20th of a second. So 20 times a second, the tick method is called. And this is where the logic happens. So this means that you basically want to make sure, hey, do we have a recipe, right? If we do have a recipe, let's increase the progress. If the progress is finished, let's craft the item. That is the general idea that we have here. And I'm going to do this with a lot of helper methods, but the general idea applies. So I'm just going to write this out. So first of all, is output slot empty or receivable? What does that mean? Well, we'll see that in just a moment. The idea is just that, hey, can we even do something in the output slot, right? Because if we're about to create something that is, if we have a ruby in here, but the recipe says that we're going to have a diamond in there, obviously I can't craft because there's no, there's no place for the diamond to go. Or if there are 64 rubies in here, I can't craft another. So that is the first step that we have. Then we're going to ask, hey, do we have a recipe? So this dot has recipe, highly recommended. This method is like basically the #1 thing that I always do. And once again, we don't have those methods yet, but you don't have to have the methods to basically write them out and think about the logic without having the methods, right? We're going to write those methods in just a moment, so don't even worry about it. We can then say, well, this dot increase craft progress, because that's the next step that we want to do, right? If we have a recipe, we want to increase the crafting process. We also want to make sure that we call mark dirty over here, passing in the world, passing in the position, and passing in the state. And then as we increase the progress, we at some point want to say, wait a second, has crafting finished? Yes. And once we finished, we can then basically do the one thing that we want to do, and that is this dot craft item, which is going to actually craft the item. And we also want to then reset the progress again, because otherwise we're just going to continuously crafting the items. And we want to make sure that if there's no recipe, we're just going to always reset the progress over here, just in case that anything weird is happening. And the same thing goes for the output slot right here, where we'll also say this dot reset progress, and we'll also mark dirty right here by passing in the world, by passing in the pause and the state right there. And there we go. And that is the entire logic done, right? Can we actually output something into the output slot? If yes, do we have a recipe? If yes, we're going to increase the progress. And if the crafting is finished, we're going to craft the item and we're going to reset the progress again. That's all that there's to it. This is the entire logic of the tick method of the block entity. Of course, if you want to do something else, then you need to figure out the logic right here. But in theory, this is pure logic. This is very, very straightforward. So now we're going to hover over this and create all of these different methods. So you can see the is output slot method. We're going to create the has recipe method. This one, all in the block entity, of course. Crafting finish. We're going to say the craft item method, as well as the reset progress method. We're going to start with the reset progress method because that's the easiest. We're just going to say this dot progress is equal to 0. That's going to reset the progress. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Craft item method is a little bit complicated, so let's start at the bottom over here. So we're basically going to say, is output slot empty or receivable? What does that mean? Well, we're going to return the following. This dot get stack of the output slot, right? So we're going to pass in the output slot. If this is empty, right, that means that we can definitely insert something there because there's no item in there. That's fine. Or this dot get stack output slot dot get count is smaller than this dot get stack output slot dot get max count. Basically meaning if this is empty, or you can actually still put an item in there. But look that we are not actually evaluating whether or not an item can be placed there. We're just getting the count or whether or not it's empty. The evaluation of what is in there is actually going to be happening in the recipe over here. Because at this point, we actually don't have the item yet that is going to be placed in there. So that's going to be happening in the has recipe. So that's here, and then the has recipe is asked. So let's do this. So as I've said before, this time we're going to hard code this, but next time in the next tutorial, we're going to make it so that we have a actual recipe. So in this case, we're just going to get the result over here, which is going to be a new item stack of mod items.ruby, and then a boolean has input. Like I said, next time this is going to be replaced with a proper thing. This is going to be get stack of the input slot, get item. And if the item is mod items.rawRuby, then we can proceed. So then we can say the following. We can return has input. And I'm just going to immediately add 2 helper methods here, and that's going to be the get can insert amount into output slot and the can insert item into output slot. Result.getItem. Why am I doing this? Well, this is just future proofing. Once again, I'm just making sure that the output slot over here can receive my result, right? This one, as well as the amount of my result. So I'm just going to create that method and create that method. Here, I probably want to actually also pass in the result right here. So that's going to be the item stack result. So can insert amount, very straightforward. We're just going to return this dot get stack of the output slot if the count of that plus the result dot get count. So this is going to be how many we're going to get, right? If that is greater than get stack output slot dot max count, greater than, then that will be true. So we actually want to do this opposite. We can insert into this if this is smaller or equal to the max count, because otherwise it will be bigger. So there you go. That's going to be the can insert amount into output slot, while the item basically just checks whether or not it's empty or we can put it in there. So we can say this dot get slot output slot dot get item is equal to the item that we are inserting, or get stack output slot dot is empty. And with that, the has recipe method hard-coded type is basically done. The increase craft progress method is as easy as saying progress plus plus. That's all we need to do. Has crafting finished just returns progress is bigger or equal to max progress. And then crafting the item basically just sets the item, removes one of the items from the input slot, and it then creates one of the items in the output slot. So we're just going to, so basically it's going to do this dot remove input slot 1. So it's going to remove one item from the input slot. It's then going to get the item stack over here. This is once again the result equal to a new item stack mod items dot ruby. This dot set stack in the output slot. And it's going to make a new item stack of the result dot get item. And then it's going to get the stack from the output slot. It's going to get that count plus result dot get count. There are probably better ways to do this, but that's the way that I found this. And there we go. That's pretty much going to be everything we need. Then we are going to reset the progress. And with that, the logic is done. So this is going to be the logic of our block entity. And we just now need to create the screen and the screen handler. That is one other step that we still need to do. As I said, there's a lot of things to do. So let's just finish this up with the screen handler so that we can actually see something happening. So setting up the screen handler and the screen is going to be done in a new package. We're going to call this the screen package. And here we're going to need 3 new classes. The mod screen handlers class. This is basically how we're going to register the screen handler. We'll also need the gem polishing screen. And we will also get the gem polishing screen handler. There you go. We're going to start with the screen because that is the easiest class to do. This will extend the handled screen class of type gem polishing screen handler. We're going to hover over this and implement the draw background method. Hover over this again, create constructor matching super. Now this is going to give us an error, but that's going to be okay because right now we haven't finished the screen handler class just yet, but we're going to do that in just a second. And then we're going to have a private static final identifier called texture. This is going to be our GUI texture. So there's going to be a new identifier of tutorial mod.modID, and this is going to be under textures / GUI or GUI / gem _ polishing _ station _ GUI or GUI once again. There you go. We're going to need that in just a second. You want to override the init method. Now in the init method, you can change the title. So you can see that in the actual GUI texture, there's no title up here and there's no inventory written right here. If you want to keep this, then you can keep this, of course. If you don't, then you can change the X and the Y of the title. This is going to be the title of your, like the name of your actual block entity. And then there's also the player inventory title as well. So I just changed the Y values here to 1000, and that is basically just going to get both of them removed from the screen. Like I said, if you don't want to do this and you want to remove them, then you can just change the Y and the X values right there. In the draw background method, we want to do a couple of things. The first one is going to be the render system dot set shader. And the shader we want to set is the game renderer : get position text program. This is just some general stuff that you always need to do. I'm not too familiar with the render system to know 1000% what the frick they're doing here, but that is basically if you take a look at this is the set shader color over here to 111 and 1. If you take a look at the draw background methods of under other handled screens, that's basically always what they're doing. And then here, this is the important one. We want to set the shader texture, and that is the big thing. So this is going to be 0 with the texture identifier, and that's actually going to be the first thing. And then we're going to have an int x, which is going to be width minus the background width. And we're going to start this with parentheses divided by 2. And then we can actually duplicate this for y over here. And then this is going to be the height minus background height, also divided by 2. That's going to give us the x and y values for where this needs to be drawn, because this needs to be drawn. So the texture here is going to be drawn at x and y with a 0, 0 offset, and the size is going to be the background width and the background height. We will then also make a render progress arrow method, passing in the context, passing in x and passing in y. It's going to be a custom method over here. I'm going to create that method, and you can see. And basically here, what I want to do is I want to get this arrow drawn on here. And the way to do this is actually fairly straightforward. So if we are in the screen, we first of all are going to say handler.isCrafting. Now that doesn't exist just yet because we haven't done this in the handler, but we're going to create that in just a moment. And then we're going to say context.drawTexture. Once again, we're going to draw this texture. This time, however, x plus 85 and y plus 30, and we're going to have an offset of 167 and 0 with a width of 8 and a height of handler.getScaledProgress. Once again, those methods are going to be created in just a second. And what is this craziness doing? Well, we're taking the texture that is defined right here. So this is going to be this texture. Fair enough. What does the first number mean, right? So this is where we are going to draw the texture. So we're going to draw this on x85, which is right about here. And then y is 30, so we're going to go 85 in this direction and 30 down, so we're right about here. It's like, oh, this is a very interesting place to start drawing a texture. Now, what is the texture we're drawing? Well, it's this one. However, it has an offset of 167. So basically, we're going to go x 167 over here, so we're all of a sudden finding ourselves right here. And then we're drawing with a width of 8, which is exactly the width of the arrow right here. And then a scaled progress. Basically, we're going to start drawing the amount of this arrow, right? How much we're going to draw is going to be determined by how far along the crafting progress we are. That's basically what we're doing here. So if you have a progress that goes from left to right, the scaled progress right here would not be the height, but you want to put this under the width. That's pretty much all we're doing. You might need to play around with this a little bit to completely get it, but once you understand it, it is actually very, very straightforward what happens here with the texture. And then we will also override the render method, and here we're going to call the render background method, passing in the context, mouse X, mouse Y, and the delta. And then we're also going to call the draw mouse over tooltips, passing in the context mouse X and mouse Y. And then we basically have the screen done, and we can proceed to the screen handler, which is actually, believe it or not, just the tiniest bit more complicated, because that one actually handles all of the screen things. So this is actually going to be sort of the brain, so to speak, of the screen. So this is the screen handler class, and we're going to hover over this, implement the quick move method as well as the can use method, hover over this again, create constructor matching super. And then in here, we're going to basically shake this up entirely, because for this, we need a private final inventory. That's going to be from NetMinecraft inventory called inventory. We will also need a private final property delegate. So this is once again the property delegate from the block entity. We then have a public final gem polishing block entity called block entity. And then we can proceed with the constructors. Now we're going to have new ones. This is going to be a public gem polishing screen handler. We're going to get a intra sync ID. We're going to get a player inventory called inventory. And we're going to get a packet byte buff called buff. And that is going to call this passing in sync ID, passing in inventory, passing in inventory.player.getWorld. It's going to get crazy out in here. Get block entity, buff.read block position. And then after the second closing parenthesis, we're going to say a new array property delegate, passing in a 2 right here. We then hover over this and create that constructor right here. We can then delete the constructor that was already created for us. And then here in the super, first parameter is going to be empty and then a sync ID, because this one, for the first one, we need to first register the screen handler, so no worries at all. We're then going to call the check size method, passing in the block entity right here, and then a 2, because, well, we're expecting the block entity to be the size of 2. We have to cast this to an inventory. We don't necessarily need to do this, but it's a good thing to do. this.inventory is equal to block entity.cast, once again casting this to an inventory, very important. Then we're going to call inventory.onOpen, passing in inventory.player. So this is the player inventory, while the block entity is obviously the block entity inventory. Then this.property delegate equals to the array property delegate. This.block entity is then equal to the block entity right here. And we also have to cast this time to a gem polishing station block entity. There you go. Then we want to add the slots. So right now, if you were to open the screen, it would look like this. But these two slots and actually the entire inventory would not be represented because that's actually all done in the screen handler. So we want to call this.add slot and then a new slot right here. This is going to be of the inventory with index 0 at position 80 and 11. And then we duplicate this with an index of 1 at 80 and 59. So the first slot is going to be this one and the second slot is this one. That's the whole idea here. And then for the last two things, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy over the add inventory and the hotbar methods because those are basically always going to be the same. You can see that we're basically just adding slots for the player inventory and it's already calculated the indices and the positions. You might have to change the positions a little bit if you have a custom GUI over here, like a custom GUI, then you might have to change the numbers here a little bit. But overall, you know, for the testing of this, for the gem polishing station, you can basically take those, and what you just want to do is we want to call the add player inventory method, passing in the inventory right here. So this one, I'm actually going to rename this to player inventory just so that you understand a little bit more where this is. This.inventory is the inventory inside of the gem polishing station, while the player inventory is the player inventory. So that's quite important. Then we want to add the hotbar over here, player inventory. And then lastly, we want to call add properties and passing in the array property delegate. There you go. For the quick move method, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy over the method right here. I'm going to copy this over. This is going to be the inf slot right here. And I highly recommend you do the same. This is for shift clicking purposes. And it's always going to be this weird method. Yes, we could go through this and explain it in like 20 minutes. But overall, it's basically always going to be the same. It's just going to look for the slot that is free, either inside of the inventory or the player inventory, and then put the stack in there. And for the canUse method, you just want to say this.inventory.canPlayerUse and then passing in the player right here. Because we have the property delegate, we can literally just ask for that. So isCrafting is going to be just basically getting the property delegate.get the index 0, and if that is bigger than 0, we know that the progress inside of the block entity is more than 0, so we're currently crafting. And for the get scale progress, I shall be just copying over this method, so you can basically see that we're going to getting the progress as well as the max progress, and then there's just some basic math over here that determines whether or not the scale progress has gone on. This is the width in this case, or the height for us, right? So the 26 is going to be the height for the arrow, and that's just going to basically scale the progress. If it's 50%, it's going to show the arrow at 50%, so 13 pixels. If you were creating new slots, you should use the inventory and not the player inventory. That is very important. So you can see here we're using the inventory. This is the inventory of the actual block entity and not the player inventory. This is why it's a very good idea to rename this to player inventory instead of just inventory, because otherwise it gets quite confusing. We now just have to register it, and then we can finish all of our different things that we need. So this is going to be the public static final screen handler type of type gem polishing screen handler. This is the gem underscore polishing screen handler equal to registry, making sure we once again choose net Minecraft registry, very important. Register.registries.screen handler with a new identifier right here. Tutorial mod.modID and then the gem underscore polishing. After the first closing parentheses, a new extended screen handler type, passing in gem polishing station, screen handler, : new. And then of course, once again, a public static void, register screen handlers, tutorial mod.modid.logger.info, and then just getting this, registering screen handlers. For tutorial mod.modid, once again, the logger here is not necessary, but I do like to add it. And then we can add this here, mod screen handlers.register screen handlers. We can then fix this error right here by saying mod screen handlers.gem polishing screen handler. No more errors should be present in the screen handler class. Then going back to the block entity, we can say a new gem polishing screen handler, passing in the sync ID, passing in player inventory, passing in this, and then passing in this.property delegate. This is just because this is seen as an array property delegate. Just change this to a property delegate, and then the error here should go away. There we go. And that basically is it. Now we've done a lot of things, and we've gone around quite a few times. We now just need to check that the screen handler and the screen are linked together, and we do this in the tutorial mod client class right here. So we're going to say handled screens.register mod screen handlers.gem polishing screen handler, and then a gem polishing screen : new. No errors should be present, and we should be good to go. And for the data gen, we simply want to call the register simple state method over here. This should just be generating the block state, and there we go. So let's just run the data through over here, and then we will see what we're going to need so that it's going to display properly as well. And you can see in the block states, it's going to just generate a block state variant over here and no block model JSON file. However, it is going to just generate an item model JSON file, exactly what we want. So that's exactly what we want here. So we now jump into the game and see our block entity work finally. All right, we're back, and you can see now this is all great. And if I put a raw Ruby in here, we should see, there we go, the progress start going, and now we get a Ruby out of it, and it's continuing along and basically crafting. Absolutely awesome. And if there's something else in there, you can see it stops over here because, of course, it can no longer insert the Ruby over here. So this is, of course, all hard-coded, right? So we can only put a raw Ruby in here and only get a Ruby out. But, of course, next time, we're actually going to change that. Because in this video right here, we'll also add a custom recipe type to our block entity. Hope to see you there. So, yeah.